Welcome to the Simplify Consulting podcast, where we will be today discussing the controls environment. Joining me today is Kate Montserrat, co-founder and director of Simplify Consulting, and consultant Annetta Merzer. Welcome, ladies.
Hello.
So controls environment is something we get involved with regularly with our clients, isn't it? Something that we're constantly looking to identify and assess controls. But I just want to come to you first, Kate. Can you tell us a bit more about why the controls environment is so important?
Yeah, definitely. Controls very close to my heart. I've got a risk and regulatory background, and actually controls and understanding what those controls are is really, really important from a number of different perspectives. So in particular, in today's kind of environment, the regulator is obviously really interested in firms demonstrating that they can, first of all, identify their controls, assess them, and then continually improve them. And it shows the regulator that a business can do that. They actually understand the risks and then make a conscious decision about how they manage those risks through controls. So that's a really key reason as to why understanding of controls is important, especially when it comes to things like operational resilience, which obviously is on people's agenda at the moment, and even things like consumer duty as well. And I think from a firm's perspective, it helps them understand points of failure and points of potential failure. And again, it's not saying you've got to manage all of your risks with loads and loads of controls. It's being conscious about being proactive in understanding what those risks are and then deciding whether you want to add a control to potentially manage that risk or not. So just having that understanding ultimately then helps protect the customer, which is all why we're here in the wealth industry anyway. So a well-controlled and managed business ultimately helps to protect our customers.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think we often see a lot of challenges around the control environment with our clients. And some of the ones that I've observed are around a lot of the controls tend to be manual. And some of that's driven by kind of legacy IT estates and so on. But some of it's how things are built up over time, frankly, as well. But manual controls can be quite inefficient. They can be quite expensive, actually. Having people run those as well. Some of the other things I've noticed is how back-ended a lot of the controls are. So you're not proactively avoiding risks happening, actually you're resolving issues after the event. So obviously that's got, again, an efficiency perspective, but also an outcome for the customer potentially too. What other sort of challenges have you seen with some of our clients around the controls environment?
I think in addition to what you have, Emma just said, is around the articulation of those controls and how they link to the risks, what Kate mentioned previously. It's making sure that we understand what the control is trying to achieve. We're clear about it. We're clear what risk is there to mitigate. And as you said, Emma, as the control environment grows over time, quite often the firms don't take that step back and review those controls. Have they built it over the controls that already existed? Have we got more controls than we really need to mitigate specific risks? So I think that's one of the points that perhaps we see firms having challenges around, and as well those controls being smart. So again, it's kind of really good point to consider whenever we're looking and reviewing the controls.
And I think it's so easy to go in and look with a fresh pair of eyes. I think, to be fair to the businesses that we work with and the people operating those processes and operating those controls, so busy, lots of pressure from BAU. It's easy just to get kind of caught up in just, carrying out that process. We can come in with a fresh pair of eyes, a fresh perspective, look at things kind of end to end to then see that duplication and inefficiency and actually help. And I think, to your point, Annetta, I think firms are quite nervous about removing controls, but actually sometimes that is the right answer because it's not adding any value, and it's completely inefficient, and it's not actually mitigating the risk anyway. And often what we find is even with a control in place, errors still happen. So it's almost, what is the point in it?
And I think a lot of the time an issue happens, whatever it might be, in operations, and the knee-jerk reaction is to throw a control at it. And that may or may not be the right answer, mightn't it? So that step back, as you say, can often lead to rationalisation of controls rather than additional ones.
Definitely.
So we understand why it's important. We understand the challenges. Just wonder, Aneta, there's often a disconnect, isn't there, between the RCSA and the controls actually being operated on the ground. Why do you think that is?
So I think a lot of it often comes down to the kind of risk culture and the kind of how the businesses operate. So quite often we see that the RCSAs are being set probably in isolation, or maybe not with enough engagement from the business. So when looking at controls from business perspective, quite often they kind of down in details. And if those controls, if there are no clear links to RCSAs, to top risk, if it's not really understood, then obviously it's very easy to have this disconnect. So I think that kind of ongoing collaboration, risk culture, working with the business when setting up top risks, risk strategy, making sure that kind of the business is aware of the kind of risk appetite, and then how those controls link to those risks, mitigate those risks is key, which quite often that misconnect is there, and something that we have seen that a number of companies are looking to address and work more collaboratively together.
Definitely.
Thank you, Aneta.
And I think some of it comes down to level of detail as well, doesn't it? I think we've worked with so many different businesses now where an RCSA can literally be a process level, or an RCSA can be, you know, the top 10 risks and that is it. There's no real right or wrong answer as long as the business understands the risks and the controls, and then they can demonstrate for the regulator that they've got a well-managed business, and obviously all of that framework around it supports that. Very different ways of managing risk.
I think your point around culture is right as well, Aneta. You know, that it can't be done in isolation. No. It's got to be a more collaborative approach, hasn't it? So people really need to understand why they're doing what they're doing, not just operating those controls in isolation. Okay, so looking ahead, what does the future look like for controls environment? I noticed that the FCA were talking the other day around some of the huge proportion of the industry using certain cloud providers as an example. Is there going to be more sort of cross-industry look at controls?
Yeah, definitely. So we're lucky enough to be part of the TISA Operational Resilience Working Group, actually. We get some fantastic insight. And obviously not to give any detail away, but there is a lot of debate around practically how do you test the resilience of the industry. I think as a wealth industry, you know, we were sort of working in silos, maybe legacy technology. Now we're moving to a world where things are so connected, so interconnected. You know, I think platform providers, for example, use the same data feed providers and banking, et cetera, So if one of those providers fails for whatever reason, that could have a huge implication on a number of different players in the industry. And I think operational resilience, whilst it's a fantastic initiative just for a firm, also as an industry, we need to get better understanding of how those cross-industry controls are operating, and how do we test them? How do we know that they're resilient? So I think that's the next big challenge for us all, actually, something that we're working with TISA on at the moment.
Fantastic. So it shows that it's you're right down in the weeds in terms of some of these controls and what's going on in the nitty-gritty, but actually there's a much bigger picture at play here as well, which we're all going to need to feed into and be aware of.
Definitely. And it's all around, you know, protecting the customer. That is why we're here. That's why we're all here, to support the firms, to protect the customer. So, you know, and that's the best reason possible to make sure it works. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much for joining me today. If anyone watching thinks that we can help them with improving their control environment, then do feel free to get in touch. But otherwise, see you another time. Thanks very much, all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.